going on with that.
Can we commence? Can we commence? So our first reader this evening is Carmen Firan. And Carmen is a poet, novelist, short story writer, journalist, and playwright. Born in Romania, she has lived for many years in New York, where she has become an important figure in the American literary community while maintaining a major literary figure abroad. Firan has published 20 books of poetry, novels, essays, and short stories. Her writings appear in translation in many literary magazines and in various anthologies in France, Israel, Sweden, Germany, Ireland, Poland, Canada, UK, and the US. Her recent books and publications in the United States include Interviews and Encounters, Carmen Firan in Dialogue and Poetry with Nina Cassian, Inferno Rock and Dew, also Words and Flesh, which is probably her most important book since I published it. The Second Life, The Farce in the Most Beautiful Life, and The First Moment After Death. As a Romanian, Firan inherits one of the most critical literary traditions in the history of modernism, that is to say Surrealism and Dadaism, and was the chief editor of Born in Utopia, an anthology of modern and contemporary Romanian poetry. The tradition of which Firan is the central figure, which I just named, has been described by Andrei Codrescu as follows. In the years following the collapse of the wall, Romanian poets have assaulted the English language directly and indirectly with impressive vigor. Romanians, whether in the depths of the Transylvanian provinces or in the better parts of Manhattan, respond to the word poetry with a straightening of the shoulders, a chin-forward movement, and a faraway gaze. We may not be sure of many things, they say, with the arrangement of the body, but we are sure of our poetry. As I have written elsewhere, Carmen Firan writes with knife-edge precision of our apocalyptic world. Firan would believe herself invented to be masterless, but, like us all, is haunted by yesterday's household snake. That's a quote from one of her poems. In a world at times of deceptive calm, where death swims on her back, it is a world of betrayals and deceit. It is therefore our world, but rarely understood and rendered with such crisp clarity. Carmen Firan.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Ed, for having me. I feel always privileged because of Ed, not because we cooperated in the past to many literary projects, but I'm very grateful for our friendship, which actually is more important than many things today. I was thinking that to be happy, you must be first kind. And Ed is the symbol of kindness. And thank you, Ed, again. So, I'm going to read tonight. I don't write in English. I don't dare to play with the language. I came here late in my life, but I was lucky enough to have a great translators, much better than I am. And I'm going to read from my book of Poetry and Dialogue with Nina Cassian, one of the greatest Romanian poetess. She passed away a few years. We have a very close friendship. And we put together a book just a few months before she passed away. This book contains basically a dialogue about politics and life and vanity and death and arrogance, but also has two sections of poetry, selected poems by Nina that I did, and selected poems, mine poems selected by Nina Cassian. So I will read from her selection from my poems. Most of them are translated by Andrei Codrescu. When is another translator, the other one is Isaiah Schaeffer, I will mention, but otherwise all of them are translated by Andrei. And another thing before I start reading, because I'm not going to talk later on, I don't write poetry for a specific event. For instance, I don't know, something sad in my life or good in the world, but sometimes the poems reflects the events that impress me mostly. So you might recognize a poem for New Orleans after Katrina or for September 11. But what I want to tell you is in this book, I have some old poems that I wrote during the communist time, when the freedom of expression in Romania was banned, and when my poetry was metaphorically political because I couldn't say straight what I was thinking. Now I feel that those poems are very actual in America today. So I read two of them and you'll recognize them, okay? What remains? Poetry, a rare snake, binds hands and learns how to perform, coiling insidiously in the service of power. But wait, don't throw the mantle of clouds off my shoulder. Remember, in the beginning was the word. At the end, the word distorted. Eventually, there only remained poetry, a blue snake, insinuating itself into our full cup of tears. Suppositions. What would the Savior have looked like grown old? Would he still have lent his severe nostalgic face to the builders of churches, to the arrogant destroyers in quest of myth, or guilty would have healed his own joints, letting the water remain water, while the blind fumbled along their way? Would he have given his last son to doubt, or in the evening, laying his head on Magdalena's knees, would have seen the earth as round, spinning in her index finger? T for one. The most difficult thing to learn is to live alone, to put under tree bark the body of the newborn from which a new tree will grow, to seduce your time like a capricious lover who will betray you with another's woman's age, with a father's image descending on the face of another man, but just as unyielding. The most difficult thing is to drink your tea in the morning together with your solitude, and to gaze at her thin fingers stirring the sugar in your cup. Flight tracks. In every dream, I speak a different language, and in every language, words have a different color. Blind dreams rise from my forehead, inflated on the purple horizon. From all I said in my lives before and to come, there remain only the flight path, the wings whisper, the island where I took refuge. Free, oh free, inside so many walls, on which I scratch neither hearts or love words, but signs in the language I speak while asleep, a dialect of old angelic, still useful for crossing borders. I have a vocation for happiness, a sort of unconscious facility at making an ally of the caretaker of dreams, who is always ready to lend me the silk cocoon in which words sneak past customs, intimate objects I carry with me undeclared. Nothing's to be done with my golden dowry. Dead languages yield just the powdery dust of stars. Crack-ups. In my late 30s, I killed my ego in the bathroom. I slowly twisted its neck with my own 2 hands. The Adam's apple thudded to the cement floor. One by one, I cut the threads from which I drew my power, strong enough to keep me upright in a hunchback world. I knew I was mistaken to love my crack-ups more than the path of earth granted to me. Now I know that each departure is nothing more than the self-importance of not being the one who stands waiting on the platform, a tree grown in the cracks of the asphalt. In cold blood, I watched the warm, proud, salty stream snake down its chin, washing away the arrogance of forgiving nothing, the sweet venom of my daily solitude with an impounded body, the bread and butter of my youth. On the other side, I'm writing to tell you, keep away from death. She'll come again anyway, wrapping her egg in a nest of bright wires. Run as far as you can every evening around 9, when her finger weights down the hands of the alarm clock. Another dead weight, this old man a bit to the right, that woman even further, a row of birds on the window ledge picking at my heart. She guards your threshold like a trusty watchdog, lest you lavish too much of yourself on this world that needs no more than your name on a sheet of paper. I snap her spine and flees as far as I can. She helps me cross the street. She knows me by sight. A silent dog sits and waits on the other side. A love poem. Almost the same. After a while, I began to resemble you. Of course, it's for my husband, who is also a writer. I saw the same patterns in the ceiling's cracks, in the same huge prehistoric beast, in the white clouds of a summer sky in the country. I flicked my cigar the way you did, fingering an imagined guilt. My left eye migrated to your left eye. My hand grew at the end of your arm. We stroked the dog one after the other, and he never knew which was me, which were you. The Woman of Sand. I would like to have been wise, to be spared having to discover there are no sins, that our passage through life wasn't on purpose, to believe in the destiny of the melancholic conquerors, turning wine into blood or water, and to speak with reserve, frightened by all the old proverbs, saws, and warnings told by the wise, who never respected anything but genius and preserved nothing except flawlessness, from which the cynics nurse their eternity, the way the ocean follows its sensuality and always sips from the beach some woman of sand. In the most beautiful life possible, I hold with my breast the noise of the most beautiful metropolis, smiling enigmatically each time I have to justify its madness when I find myself sketched the perfect trace of its finger in the sand. From above. If that autumn morning hadn't happened, the hot exhalation of the beheaded city, the silence fallen like a lead curtain, we would have kept hedging our bets on fancied battles, on imaginary geographies. The strong are lonely, the strong are sad, vulnerable in their candor of pressing their desires so far they can no longer follow their tracks by eye. From above, it looks just the same, the dead with the dead, the living with their vanity. And two, if I still have time, 2 more poems from another book, Rack and Do. Both of them are published by Sheep Meadow Press. Actually, it's a press here in New England. So excuse my accent, which probably is very offensive to this very poor environment, but I hope you understand despite this real estate. I have a house for sale in a quiet neighborhood, only a couple of steps from hell. Location is everything. The dead body always exits feet first and tempted to run downhill, while the soul gets yanked free through a window by a well-intentioned grandmother who sacrificed her day to show off the banquet high in the heaven. I have a house for sale with new roof and triple glazed windows. It comes down to predicting the future. The dead will want perfect isolation, high ceilings to keep cool in the summer and to give the impression of open space. The sky a stone's throw away, the city the third stop on the express line, and the best yeshiva just around the corner. For quite a while now, I've tried to sell the house, roof, walls, and me. The timing is bad, my Chinese neighbor suggests, suspicious of the grapevine which throws black grace over their fence, mimicking my childhood transplanted into a foreign body. People are no longer in a rush to buy. The planet keeps getting warmer. Everything is growing, enlarging, swelling, will pop like a balloon, spread through the universe, and create other utopias. Okay, but in the here and now, I have an old brick house for sale. Motionless on the threshold, I'm waiting for buyers from other planets. Please hurry, it's not even my house. Requiem for the Sinking City. It takes naivete to believe the tales of the old knife thrower, the blues dancer and the alligator's back, from which he'll fashion evening bags and binding for books written in the language of dream, madmen who with sound and fury besiege the streets of the Vieux Carré, shutters from colonial houses float downriver, coffins wrapped in Mardi Gras beads carry the last pharaohs of the food can pyramids. The blind saxophonist set his shoes to dry in a voodoo shop window. He snaps his soul down as if dealing the fool from whom the archangel tattooed with the blood hearts bets against crooked angels, witches fly on a single wing abortion babies, little clay devils who cowered among dancers' feet. It takes naivete to believe that this century will ever wake up from its bloody hangover of the senses. The world's placenta bubbles muddy waters. Death swims on her back, pulling behind her last streetcar. And a poem written after we've been in India, a place with no time. There are neither disappearances nor separations, only meanderings of the mind. What remains after nothing remains is the soul pulverized into air and walls, the unbeing just as illusory as the flesh. We will return over here unseen, on the wing of an insect or in the skin of a snake. We will quietly unfold our sheets. Lotus will spring for our joints with delicate necks, moving our world from above so we can reach with our bare feet the sunset. Neither sky nor earth, neither human nor bird, only life chopped up on a tray from which cynical gods taste and spit in turn. And the last poem, Paradoxes of Sleep. Unlike illusions, all white, dreams without a trace of the shape or the soul of someone stretched out between the street and death. They do not sell newspapers anymore, and what they publish now are only paradoxes, the sleep of the mind written with impotent pens, distortions drawn with real ink. Nor do they sell illusions anymore. The gates of the city have been locked. Thank you.
Good evening. I had.
You have any blankets?
Pardon me?
Blankets?
Blankets?
Yeah.
You're cold? I'll go back and hit the switch again because it was, cause I found it last night. It's obviously been moved.
Would you object to me closing the door? There's such a din now. Like, do you mind closing the door or should we leave it open?
Is the outside door open?
Well, that's it.
I was going to, but there's a huge table there.
Yeah, why don't you close the outside door? I think that'll solve the problem. No, I opened it. I'll tap dance. Microphone, are you saying? Thank you. By the way, I have arranged, since they're setting up for a dance outside, there will be a sign up and everybody can read for 5 minutes after this reading. I told them there'd be a line of poets out there. Are we set? Beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Blankets, I thought. It's like, what?
You're harassing me.
So I have the privilege of introducing Chloe Garcia Roberts, which is quite fun because Chloe was somebody that I had come across up at the Lamont Poetry Room where she was the assistant to the director and then bumped into her at numerous readings and had never heard her read. And finally, in sitting at one of the notorious Boston Poetry Marathons, she was up for the opening night. And as I sat there, as clearly as I can describe to you, the voice of George Herbert came into my head and reciting the entire beginning of the temple. And so I leapt at poor Chloe. You probably don't even remember this, but you do. And said, "You must know George Herbert." And she said, "No, I haven't." And so it was always a curious thing, a curious marker to me. And I got to hear her read a couple of more times, again in short venues. But I knew as I was setting up my own reading series that this was somebody that I wanted to have come read for me because I just felt an energy there that was what I look for, I guess. And so I had the experience of, at our reading series in Somerville, of being able to listen to her marvelous book, which New Directions put out, of Chinese translations, which were just wonderful, and the type of thing where you can just sit back and enjoy feeling the ancientness of the poetry in the hands of somebody that knows what they're doing with the poems. But then she asked, said she would like to read, if it was okay with all of us, to read some new work. And as she settled into these new poems, I watched the entire room, which one does when you're organizing these things, go from pleasurable listening to an intensity of movement where everybody was leaning forward, and it was a poetry that sustained itself for, a half an hour at least in that particular group that was just absolutely breathtaking to listen to. She has said to me earlier in the day that she intends, and I hope I'm not fouling you, but to read some more of those tonight, and I hope she does. So please hearken unto a verser, Chloe Garcia Roberts.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. I am indeed going to read some more new work. One poem that I haven't read out loud, and these poems are long, so I'll just say that. There's a point where I think I'm going to hold up some signs, so hopefully everyone will be able to see them. Otherwise, I'll read what's on them. So I'll read one and we'll see how we're doing on time for a second. Guilt. I remember as a child reading a myth in which a hero was on a quest to pick a golden apple from a whole tree of golden apples. At the beginning of the story, the hero was a thief, so he had to enter the garden where the tree grew at night. And as he approached, each of the apples on the tree cried out to him, "Pick me, pick me, pick me," with the same small voice, the same gleaming skin tucked among the darkened leaves. Sight is useless in regards to the identical, so the hero, who at this point in the tale was on the threshold of becoming a hero, had to make his choice blindly, because the truth was there was only one apple on the tree. All of the others were fake. I seem to remember that an unspoken death awaited the hero if he picked the wrong fruit, though in the end, of course, he didn't. He picked his apple, which was the only apple, and presented it to I forget whom in order to get I forget what. What I do remember is that I always wondered how the hero succeeded in making the right choice and thus surviving. The story never said, but I surmised the answer was that the hero himself was the right choice, that like a key, he could open the moment and pass through it unharmed, the golden apple being the proof of his wholeness, incorruptible sustenance ad infinitum. Which of course then made my child's thought fly to all the wrong people, the ones who had preceded him, each like the false fruit in their way, like the opposite of a key, becoming in fact, with their unspoken fates, part of the door that separated the true apple from the world. I became a writer because of this myth. The lesson my child self took from the story was that for every human situation, every human trauma, there existed a key that could release you. And I determined that this key must be made of words. I believed that to be a writer was to be a hero in the garden, approaching with a blind faith that you will be the right person in the right moment to speak the gold, pull it from its stem, magically unharmed. I've since found out that the myth I remembered is actually an apocryphal amalgamation of several stories and never actually existed at all. When people tell me everything will be okay these days, I think of your grandfather's gold wristwatch that we keep like a shrouded heart in a metal safe in the closet. Its rounded heft a weight on the spindly platitudes I tell myself about surety, infallibility, stability. Those nights when I sleep and my heart watches, I can hear behind the smooth, shiny face of your grandfather's American origin story, behind his Auric deliverance from the war, like a seething of tiny teethed gears, trauma, reduced to slight gleamings of horror passed down through the family, the babies screaming as they were pitched out of windows, the executions, the years lived underground, hiding like animals. In the thrall of the terror, everything that your grandfather owned had to be converted into a currency that would hold value in a new world. Anything he wanted to bring had to be changed to a weight that could be born, as he was born from one life into another. Gold serves both these purposes. Modern psychology has us trace lines of trauma back like breadcrumbs to the site of the original wound, which is what trauma means in Greek. But sometimes the wounds run wider than the river of one lifetime. Sometimes they cross many and present themselves like a form of currency that has changed itself to be used anew. What do we do then? Must we spend it? Someday I will have to tell you about my time in that dark and filthy garden. How I wanted to go there, how I was not forced, and how one day I found myself cast out and my life began again. Then, perhaps even proudly, I will admit that I haven't lost what drew me there, that driver, that wildness, that nothingness hot and clear as the core of a flame. I've just tamed it. I've just penned it. It paces the square inch of the heart at my pleasure, like that stallion near our house, charged and dark shining as the storm, who was always running from fence to fence, yelling his song, fighting his life. Remember one day when our mothers were away, we sneaked into his paddock and stood there, a group of us cousins, each holding outstretched in our hands a freshly picked apple. And in our heads, the one-line song playing over and over again, pick me, pick me, pick me. He walked over so slowly, smiled silently above us, then bent his head and took a heart bite into my cousin's side with his great, square, and terrible teeth. That same cousin who unraveled as he grew and who calls me now in desperation to share in looping waterfalls of theories, the blousy patterns of our existence. He keeps yelling them, the theories, the connections, but I can never understand, not any of it. And when I finally hang up on him, the silence is only my own. On the other side, the soliloquy is still always spilling out, speeding somewhere I do not ever want to go. Madness runs like ore through my side of the family, and on your side, trauma. Once upon a time, I worked at a school for refugees. My favorite child in the school was a little boy so glinting and brilliant and sweet, who at the end of every day would transform into a tiny, panicked wild thing inlaid with flat and lightless eyes. I was trained to hold this child in these moments as carefully as a terrified bird, so as not to hurt his violently waving wing bones. The story the school counselor told me was that he had witnessed so much trauma as a baby that later, when he could speak, even 2 languages, he was powerless to take the weight of the unsaid and convert it into the communicable. He was unable to exchange it. He was a child who was a wall who could not be unlocked. And like clockwork, at the end of each day, the fear would fill him up again, and I, powerless to do anything else, would have to carry him home to his house, where his mother would silently take him from me and shut the door. The emptiness of life, of the atom, was discovered in an experiment where a stream of particles was shot at an expanse of golden foil. The majority of the identical particles passed through the foil and were lost to the scientists conducting the experiment, but a few were mysteriously diverted from their paths, and the trauma of their diverted trajectories was traced to prove that they had struck something, which was discovered to be the nuclei that studded the foil like plums in a pudding, the British scientist said. Though for the American reader, I would change the metaphor to apples on a tree. In English, when gold ore is located, we say that it has been struck, as in, he struck gold. The gold in this sentence is passive, and the human is the agent. But to strike is also a verb used to give agency to passive objects, like lightning or awe. Objects that when they strike alter the recipient's trajectory, a trajectory that can then later be traced directly back to the moment of the encounter. And a trajectory is just the path of any body moving under the action of given forces. And what is an apple, if not a gift? When you were given to me, when I was moving silently towards you, and the pain, my wages for an apple picked, was still something I could easily outrow. I heard through the hospital wall the screaming of a woman next door. At first, my reaction to her agony was irritation. Her pain was contaminating my space. Her inability to handle herself was making my job harder. But as her screams grew louder, my body began to answer. An internal terror suddenly unlocked, opened, and saturated me. Only then I realized the lesson of her screaming was not my first thought, that she was there and I was here because she was weak and I was not, but my second. Suffering cannot be parted with a wall, because anywhere it is not, it was and will be. In the port of Sevilla, which was the point where once all the gold extracted from the New World entered the Old, there is a cathedral where the altar, from the floor to the soaring peak of the nave, is a massive golden cliff, like a God-sized door to somewhere else. When I first saw it, I thought the whole thing was like a great gilded tantrum. Such simplicity, to think that by amassing all the small amounts, gleaning all the glimmerings, one could circumvent the necessity of a key. It's laughable, really, the sheer willfulness of asserting the answer to be as simple as we could just build a door right out of our darkness. The word gleam, to shine with a brightness subdued by distance or an intervening medium, is derived from the ancient and from the Old English word glame, which meant brilliant. The intervening years have subdued the word. The word glean, which can be spelled as gleam, just one E away from gleam, means to gather or pick up produce after the reapers. And the reaper is either a person who reaps or death personified. Thus you glean what remains, and you find what remains because it gleams. It shines with emitted or reflected light. That is the only way we see anything in measurements of reflected light. Our lives, which science calls trajectories and religion's patterns, are simply refrains picked from a tree, gleams gleaned from among the leaves. These words, glean or gleam with an E and gleam, only appear to be the same, however. They do not grow from the same root at all. They are not in fact identical, though they hang on the same tree. So inside the lie of the myth, inside the hide of the night, inside the walls of the garden, a hero picks a golden apple. A hand reaching blindly through the gleaming boughs strikes the density of truth and closes its fingers around. An apple made of gold, a metal not only highly conductive of heat and energy, but also impervious to the corrosion of death, so that it may continue to teach ad infinitum with each encounter, each song of pick me, pick me, pick me, in the only true example of alchemy, knowledge. I know now that this is not a story of choice at all, that no man may take such a gift and still continue on his own trajectory, that there is no such thing as evil, there is only us, and we do not disappoint, that the wages of sin cannot be death, because the wages of everything is death, that the only escape from the garden in possession of the treasure is to become a different person than when you entered, and that a door set in empty space is only a door if it is closed, if when struck it sings out, nothing for you this way lies, you must change your life. Thank you. shorter one that I wanted to read tonight. Goes a little faster. Thank you for your patience with my slides.
Those were cool. I like those.
Coyote. My neighbor tells me that last week a coyote walked by just beside her as she was digging in the garden. She says that at first she thought it was the dog from across the street and kept working, but then she turned and it turned, and they looked at each other before it continued on its way. She tells me she has a theory. Coyotes try to act nonchalant when they see us so that we don't see them for what they are, so they can pass as dogs and move unmolested. I think this is an interesting reading of the casual laziness of the coyote's demeanor. After all, this is an animal whose adaptability has been documented as long as there has been documenting. But actually, what was happening here when the coyote was being seen as a dog was not passing, it was shifting. One of the meanings of to pass is to be taken for something you are not, to be contingently assumed equivalent to something you inherently aren't. And the unspoken underlay of this worldview is that an accepted desire on the part of the passing to be something they do not have claim to. Passing is what those who cannot do see, because they believe in the gravity of their world as the only attractive force. Shifting is what we, the liminal, do. To shift, it is important to clarify, is not pretense, it is translation. It means to change and replace. A shifter, a shapeshifter, someone who is shifty, is one who can do this efficaciously and autonomously, who contains both the objective and the subjective, the familiar and the other, the hearth and the wilderness, this tongue y este lengua, and can move these halves quickly enough to reflect back to the beholder the familiar, the understood. Or here is another way of explaining. Do you know what a thaumatrope is? It is an antique toy made of a piece of card on a string with two incomplete images printed on either side, often an empty cage and a free bird. When you spin the string, the illusion of unity is created through the oscillation of the two distinct and separate sides. You see the bird in its cage. A thaumatrope is a perfect illustration of a mongrel. I have a memory from when I was a child in the States of the father of a classmate asking me where I was from because of my Garcia. And when I explained that my father was Mexican and my mother was Anglo, he smiled and told me I was what was called a coyote, because I was not a wolf and I was not a dog, because I was neither. Whatever his intentions were in telling me this, I am telling you this story because in that moment, for the first time in my short life, I felt that someone had finally seen me for what I truly was. Coyotes are considered scavengers here, liminal creatures who thrive living along the shifting borders between the human and the non-human. Scientists classify them as crepuscular animals because they are most active in gray times between day and night. Mostly they are considered pests, though occasionally they are considered murderers and are hunted. Their crimes are ephemeral, unsubstantiated, and rife as ghost stories. Besides the animal, another common definition for the word coyote in this country is a man who guides the traveling in secret through the wilderness across the border. Like the animal, the man must also not be a dog and not a wolf, must also not owe allegiance to either side. And I say in secret, because in order to be successful, this crossing must be unseen. The ferryman is never the hero. He is always heartless. If your family cannot pay, you cannot pass. Reviled by both sides, his only purpose his only function is to change people from one side to the other. In Western myths, the ferryman sometimes rows alone and sometimes is accompanied by Hermes, the trickster, the guider of souls. In American mythology, Coyote plays all the roles. He is not a note in a larger spiritual pantheon, but a full revolution of unraveling and creation, of journey and return. A few days after the towers fell, a friend and I went to a bar downtown, only to find it full of dancing, weeping firemen. When we walked in, we became the only two women in the room. Over the course of the night, we danced slowly with them all in turn. We held each of them crying in our arms, and they waited patiently as quiet children as we moved from one to another like bees among the flowers. One man I took outside into the darkness. While we stood on the rushing shore of the West Side Highway, he tenderly and silently traced on me the outline of a woman's body he had pulled from the ruins. Starting at my heart, across my breast, dividing my nipple under my armpit, sweeping down my horrified arm, holding my finger, then back to my shoulder, softer now, to the base of my neck, parting up through my hair. Me, silent and still to help him as a finger breath drew a border across the hollow of my eye, around my nose, through my chin, separating with its touch the corpse from what she was missing. When he was done, he closed himself completely in grief and would no longer speak. The whole next day, I felt the side of my body he had traced to be almost imperceptibly heavier, like it had been leafed in lead, like it was someone else's, until I remembered and reminded myself I was neither the dead woman or what she had lost, or even the border between. And just like that, his projection evaporated, and what was left was me. Keats' concept of negative capability, the assertion that man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after facts and reason, is nothing but an old world homogeneous epiphany. The truth of the new world is that the capability to hold both, to embody both, negates both, and somehow, in defiance, in wonder, this neitherness becomes life. I am lying in someone's lap, in a waking dream, in a restaurant or at a party, under the table. Through the body of the person I rest on, Papa, Mom, Tio, Tia, the words I hear with my ear pressed against them like the trunk of a tree or the crest of a shell are resonant and booming, the responses as far above as the rustling of high leaves, as far away as the swallowed roar of the waves. Meaning drips down through my lulled sleepiness like condensation, but mostly the conversation is only listened to as a whole, a rushing, a shushing, like all adults talking. This is where Spanish always takes me, to the shore of the country I left, the country I shifted away from. In New Mexico, we would call our dogs inside at night when we heard the coyotes outside singing. We would keep them inside, no matter how much the dogs begged us, whining to let them free. I had been told that to let dogs out to run with the coyotes was to let them run to their deaths, though I was also told that in an act of balanced cruelty and benevolence, the coyotes first let the dogs run with them through the night and empty their dog hearts of all their coiled wild desire before finally, just before dawn, circling them, killing them, eating them in a final blaze of glory. I believed by keeping them inside, we were protecting the dogs from the power of the coyote song, which was asking them something they did not have the strength or the wisdom to leave unanswered. The siren is a singer who is half woman, half bird. Sometimes depicted as angelic and sometimes demonic, she sings from the rocks to the sailors who pass by her shores. If the sailors follow her song, then they and their ships are smashed and killed on the rocks. In some retellings, the sirens are considered psychopomps, or spirit conductors, guiding those souls parted from their bodies on the rocks. In other retellings, the truth emerges that the sirens die if they don't sing. In English, a siren song is another way to say an alluring deception, a seductive lie. But I ask you, how can a song be deceptive if it is a matter of life or death that it be sung? If our very existence depends on it being sung? And in case you cannot see it, I should inform you I am singing right now. Thank you.
I had prepared introduction for Joel Lewis, and it is still on my computer. So my apologies, I will wing it. I first knew Joel back in the late 70s, early 80s. I knew him through Ted Berrigan, of whom he was a friend both of Joel's and mine. And Joel used to show up with a number of New Jersey poets to the classes that Ted was teaching at the Stevens Institute of Technology. I did not know Joel at that time, nor did I know any of the other poets, but I would talk with Ted afterwards, and Ted said, you know, you really ought to get to know them. So I did. And the consequence is really, I think, an important one. I think that in the minds of somebody, if there is a state in this country that could not possibly support poetry, it would be New Jersey. However, I would remind you that New Jersey is where Williams and Ginsberg and Merwin and so many on it. Go on and on and on. If you wanted to actually find a center for poetry, I would say start with New Jersey. Now, what makes New Jersey different than, say, well, Massachusetts? And having lived a good deal of my life in both of these places, I can, I think, suggest some of the things which make New Jersey a critical center for poetry. And that is that everything seems to happen and gel in a very strange way in New Jersey. I mean, after all, you think of just today. This is a place where, on the one hand, the mayor of one of the biggest cities in the country is saying the water is undrinkable, whereas a few miles away, our benighted president is playing golf. This is New Jersey. I mean, to understand this place, you understand the tremendous number of things which are happening in a very, very small span of space. And I think that basically that was what New Jersey told me. That is actually what poetry is all about. That it takes all these various elements, which presumably are completely disparate, have nothing to do with each other, and say, no, they really do. This is America. And Joel is, I think, a master of whatever it is that makes New Jersey, New Jersey. Capacity to bring everything of so many different possibilities together and weave them together and create, as a result, a masterful poetry.
Thank you very much. And would like to thank Ed for years of support and friendship. And it's true, I will take a paraphrase from the northern British poet Roy Fisher, paraphrasing his famous quote, "Birmingham is what I think with, New Jersey is what I think with." But the focus on this, my set, is a manuscript I'm working on, which collects my jazz writings, prose and poetry. And the first poem is part of the title, A Fickle Sonance, which is a title of an album by Jackie McLean, master alto saxophone player. And the title of the working manuscript is subtitled Unpopular Music, with the UN in parentheses. Because it's mostly about jazz, an interview with Moondog, just a whole range of things. The first poem is sort of based on something that happened, a poetry reading, and my background is political science, sociology, and at some point I was contemplating getting a PhD in sociology, and I thought I'd like to do my dissertation about the sociology of poetry and poetry readings. I was always very fascinated by, just how readings need certain habits and things like that. And this is sort of based on that. My dreams were all sort of ended when I met my wife and stayed on this side. It's our 33rd wedding anniversary today, and A Fickle Sonance. In Delta Sleep, I am Bluto the poet, a one-man Sanhedrin, constable of the pathetic fallacy. $50 fine for using the word soul, limit of 6 Trump poems scribed per month. But now I'm woke, or just appear to be. I think what I feel. I feel like ordering an Orange Julius. Up on Bergen Hills, I sample the Airbridge Harbor with a battered spyglass. Moon-poor sky, squelchy stars, and North River's slow-mo surface reflects Manhattan's newest towers. The absolute body of things humbles the contrite Epicurean. As for me, I count my zlotys, just enough for a beer and some pretzels, at the Fox and Crow, where it's starting time for the monthly Word Skull Poetry Group. I see a butterfly go by. Is a shy woman's opening gambit. Polite applause follows. The mystery of things intones the next poet, a defrocked Franciscan called Padre Mike, though no one wants to know his predilections. Then up jumps a wiry man, aflame with verse, shouting, I want to breathe the air all alone. The crowd goes wild. He looks straight to the back wall, declaring, I am Buttered Roll. What a name. As he walks away, the crowd chants, Buttered Roll, Buttered Roll, Buttered Roll. Next up, Senor Guillermo Ayerbe of Quito. In a blue suit and bolo tie, he waits for the crowd to calm. Then, soy pan y mantequilla. He steps off the stage. What else is there to say? I'm off in a corner, nursing a Blatz. Suddenly, I'm shoved in my back by surprise guest Gayatri Spivak, right onto the stage. Credulous vanity of poets, she grumbles. I arrive at the mic, shuffling through my drafts. Gayatri shouts, hey, what is your poetry name? The crowd is roiling. This is a poem for parking decks, I intone. I'm shouted down. What would Sharon Mesmer do? How would Mary Oliver have handled this rabble? I step closer to the mic, firmly declaiming, I am Bialy with a schmear. The crowd is silent, some ready to heave empty pony bottles at me. Then a man planted on a seltzer case gets up, walks to the stage in a hay-band suit, the blueberry muffin his wife made him that morning, resembling a goiter in his mauve jacket's left pocket. "Quitters are America's unsung heroes," he shouts. That gets a laugh. In the dark, I hear the rhythmic clink of rolling rocks slam down. He strides to the ancient rockola, slides in a buck, and gets Philly dog in exchange. Satisfied, he sits to savor the paradise of a gloomy space. My cue to slip out, as yet another sign-up sheet gets passed about. I pull out my Cheeto-stained notebook, my prized benchmark pen, and resume the habit. I took a very wrong turn in 1970 and fucked up again in 77, but I don't sweat that too much anymore. Meteor showers bore me, and that much-cited moonlight, very overrated. And you heard it here first. In the future, suburban homes will be insulated with burnt toast. And this is sort of a kind of ars poetica of sorts. It was written sort of after a reading at it's called the Torn Page Reading Series. Leanne Brown hosts this readings, and Torn is Tony Torn, and Tony's mother is Geraldine Page, so it's the Torn Page Reading Series, really old-fashioned. They've turned their house into a reading space, and poets are always staying over if you need a place to crash. Don't tell them I told you, but it's available. The woman next to me knits a burgundy scarf as she tells me that, "I love your work," and that 10 years back she bought 2 copies of Learning from New Jersey, Talisman, get a copy, at my project's book release, one for myself and one from a friend living a mantis-like life on the banks of the Musconecton. Tom Rayworth, the shortest distance between 2 points is to be everywhere, which I'm not with a hop-along stride past Sunday night's windows along Chelsea's 21st Street, plus a perfect wash of moonlight settled on a gutter pond. Who am I fooling? Thought for the 41st time today, with everyone at tonight's reading possessing daring insights, while debating the charms of irreconcilable differences to a stand-down. John Coltrane, Richard Brautigan, and Captain Beefheart ruined my life, but surely saved me from the front row seats at a Trump rally. Sessionography. Really committed jazz fans just collect every date, session, live appearance, and they put it into a big book for other crazy people to sit and study and look at every session, live appearance. And so there's sessionographies. Tonight I cannot sing, but fear to weep, so I doff a Mr. B collared shirt to balm my nerves, and nerves they are, and they've been that way generations, even back to my Galiciana forerunners, sullenly tending a sorrel patch. And what do I really know from Ben Webster, except that he enjoyed beating people up, which gained him the nickname Brute, though in his schnapps-heavy Copenhagen dotage, he wept lakes just thinking about mother, earning him a tag that was Danish slang for big old crybaby. Ben Webster and I share the same yearning for uncluttered melodic improvisation, except that my axe is a fountain pen filled with peacock blue ink. Jersey-bound, I rise up from the MTA netherworld to spy a reality star tearing up in a Chambers Street dollar store. And it makes me think back to that Scandic night when the Brute handed a kid Archie Shep a box of Rico Royal Reeds, complete with a stern admonition, "Kid, get some more vibrato." Patterson poem, in talking about centers of the New Jersey universe. Patterson, New Jersey, Ginsburg, Williams. I went to school right outside of Patterson, and we could get poets to come up and read with the promise we'd take them to the Great Falls. And we took Ted out there, and Anselm Hollow, a whole Alice Notley. And this is sort of another version of Patterson. And Garrett Mountain, if you know Williams's collected, I think it's the collected prose, he's up on this hill, and that's Garrett Mountain, which is overlooks the city. Debark off the suffering-bound train to see Williams Garrett Mountain looming huge as an umber Malamar, with those WPA stairs plunging into a city where people had given up on space to put their money on living through time. A panhandler tries out a fresh take on this new arrivant. Can you help me out? I need 63 cents to get to the Garden State Plaza, and nobody here speaks English. A beggar in a strange land gets himself a frog skin. The man in Patterson who can buy his children Happy Meals and still have change in his pocket is a little aristocrat. And with that insight filed away, I charge up on Chauncey Street Cappuccino, tip my derby to the Lou Costello statue, then stride uphill towards the Great Falls. No little lyric miracles today. Boxing Day celebrated someplace else in the world. And can that be Clifford Brown's Sandu blaring from the speakers of a great green jalopy idling by the entrance to Libby's lunch? Glorious step. Bill Evans is live at the Vanguard. When the Japanese did a new version of it from the original tapes, people began saying, I can hear the people talking in the room, and I can hear what they're saying. And Paul Motion, who's mentioned in the poem, I interviewed him for an article, and he told me this was his favorite Bill Evans albums, less for the music, but for the fact you can hear the cash register and just the sound, the ambience of a room always appealed to him because it really sounded like you're playing in a club. Someone at the Vanguard's back tables is muttering about Jack Parr and that the colored bartender is watering down the drinks. And even through earbuds, you can hear the drink ice crack to maps between the notes in Bill Evans' solo. That's where I'm going. There's plenty of that, says a husky female voice, riding over the splay of Paul Motion Zildjians. Preservation Act from an age of pillbox hats direct to today's Manhattan, where manatees now swim up the Hudson, and only the savagely sweet faces of privileged daughters remain to hold back the advancing continent. The origins of my social marginalization. I keep writing periodically because I have a lot of social marginalization to write about. 12-minute countdown to that 8:15 boat to St. George. So walk up to that enormous Starbucks at Pearl and State. Inside, I hear the sinuous flute break from California Dreaming dripping from the sound system and think, that's Bud Shank, he a magus of West Coast jazz, later a first call studio stalwart who could read fly shit on staff paper, the ultimate kudo among his peers. I then realize how cursed I am with such particular knowledge, which sets me apart from coworkers, neighbors, and August luckless latte sippers who listen to the same canned goods thinking, that's the mamas and the papas, and seen a brain kinescope of Michelle Phillips in a miniskirt. I then realize myself doubly cursed and estranged, aware that the present row of State Street's postmodern towers were once rooming houses for my landslide, cleared for entry and hot off the Ellis Island ferry, spending their first night alone in this drab new world. Wouldn't you agree? Journal Square is sort of the center of Journal Square. The Jersey Bounce from the swing era is name checked, the Journal Square there, and this is kind of a DMV poem. This Journal Square of non-working ornamental fountains, fenced-in parks, dull office buildings, Kennedy Fried Chicken joints, now seems populated with trial members of some sketchy dating service stalking potential meetup sites. An imposing woman in Robert Crumb pumps strides past me along Sip Avenue's slate sidewalk, clutching a pocketbook made of cork. I think, what happens when it rains? Recalling Portugal's Cortica Amida. I then think I ask myself too many walking encyclopedia type questions all the time, wherever I am, and to no one's amusement. That stern poet Armand Schwerner once admonished me, life is not a punchline, as he shoved back a sheaf of my works as if dosed in cooties. Every place I've been, wherever I've had neighbors or co-workers, I'm considered an intruder, a stranger, a Jew. I'm always eating lunch by myself on a bench. I'm always presenting my papers, and there's no vocal fry or no uptalk to enliven my ears as I trek among the luckless pedestrians, joining me in the silent urban cakewalk to government offices and medical clinics. My own Hajj is to the NJDMV to replace a state ID lifted in Pessoa's home city. I try to maintain my odd predilections for mutiny, convince myself I want to try skydiving, spelunking, rock climbing, sailplaning, getting blasted out of a cannon, or voting Republican. But the light changes, and here I go, crossing Summit Avenue into the standard drear motor vehicles of many forms and snake-time lines. Oh, theatrical atmospheric magic. None here. The in-house ozone heavy with unhappiness. The waiting room bleeds from oldies. Toto, Bachman-Turner Overdrive, Color My World, The Captain and Tennille, Gene Pitney, the increments of human life measured in horsefly crap. It's gotten to that. And then out of the surrounding pond of faces, someone is calling me, Joel, Joel, not the usual Joe or that sardonic Garden State salute. Hey, you, assface. The village caller in question, Jacob Burkhart, not that real dead historian, but a son of Rudy B. and friend to many of my downtown friends, but now a landslide in this land of stink bombs and unhappy waitresses. He, after 12 years here, I thought it was time to get a Jersey license. Me, I got pickpocketed in Lisbon. Our mutual presence celebrates the monotony of this place. Has anyone ever written a poem, haiku, or limerick about a DMV office until this inky mutoscope? Finally, the cinema of inertia and clanks concludes, and I wallet the proof text of who I am to them, but the emigrant Jewy feeling lingers while the convulsive network spindles on, with the box tops the letter serving as a pencil point of sound. To whom it may concern, lock the lock when leaving. But first, Azu, and a question to my still entrapped online brother culture worker. Jacob, who do you most admire? Dead or alive? Rumor or myth? He replied by looking past me and towards the breaking sunlight outside. Pigeons, because nothing phases them. And this next sequence of poems is about the jazz saxophonist Stan Getz. And it's sort of my term in Jewish culture, Hebrew culture, teshuva, which means penance. Because when I was young and getting into music, I was schooled by the fiercest black nationalists you can know, the white black nationalists, who told me, Stan Getz, these guys, Ahmed Jamal, they're no good. You know, and in my dotage, they're okay. They're great. So, it sort of ties in that we're beginning the Jewish holiday, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is coming up. If you're an Orthodox Jew, going for morning services, they blow a shofar at each service. Just remind you, get your act together and get it going. So these are a series of poems about Stan Getz, East of the Sun. And these are titles of some of the songs he performed. Stan Getz at his best seemed to play his audience's dreams, masculine lushness dappled with bay rum aftershave. He also did interesting things, like bringing samba to the pre-Beatle era, firing sidemen for farting on the bandstand, and holding up a Seattle Rexalls with a water pistol. The drug-addled Getz blew that heist as the petite cashier ignored the junk-jittery Ganef and waited on the wants of an elderly Filipino gent. But why worry that this demeanor? His incredibly lovely sound stayed in the air of this secessionist February morning. It makes me think of Lucky Strikes, the texture of gabardine and cracked ice melting in a finger-printed sifter. Asked by Edward R. Morrow for the secret behind his sound, Stan sighed as he replied, "When I see things through my eyes, I see things." I let a song go out of my heart. I knock at the mystery door and it opens, and there Stan Getz in a lovely cantaloupe polo shirt, the inevitable drink in hand, inviting me in. "You're Jewish, right? I can tell. You've got that open smile. Welcome to my mishpacha stand, with Kenny Barron playing piano from a tape deck. He shows me his latest album, Stan Getz, The Business of Visitation, with Chet Baker on ham sandwich. It ties in so well with your interest in Gnosticism, I said. The faint lettering of his air quotes seemed like a geologic gesture. Beautiful things seem to come out of nowhere, but they don't. Stan was wearing a smoking jacket with a pineapple pattern. While crushing out another Pall Mall, he said in a near murmur, "Train once said about me, face it, we all want to sound like that if we could. But when I'm off, I don't want to be the Jewish Lester Young." And this is Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams. Herb Alpert and Stan Getz go off to shul. And this is true. It comes out of one line from reading a biography of Stan Getz, and I just ran with it. It's 5749, according to the kitschy Jewish calendar Herb Alpert nailed to a kitchen wall, the sealed stamped letter with his check to the Chesed Food Bank sitting on the marble counter. "I'm mailing it in for tzedakah," he tells his wife Lanny Hall. "Neil Tzedakah has money problems?" She responds, "No, not Neil. It's tzedakah, charity, and I'm mailing it on the way to Kol Nidre. Hey, can I get some more matches herrings?" That's Stan Getz plowing through the catered spread from Nate and Al's. Getz' years of living in Denmark with a Swedish wife made him something of a herring maven. "This is great, Herb. It reminds me of Yom Tov at Shelley Mann's parents back in the 40s, except like we are in a swanky style movie set instead of a crummy Bronx apartment." Alpert, a tailor's son from Los Angeles' blue-collar Boyle Heights, had become amazingly wealthy, creating pop music for 60s era's adults. His band, the Tijuana Brass, were like the Beatles for people with mortgages and PTA nights to attend. The Brass were omnipresent, TV specials, commercials, movie soundtracks, top 10 hits, albums with racy photos. "Now that's real music," roared my Uncle Maish as he put the needle down on Spanish Flea for the 5th straight time during a Sunday supper at their Ocean Parkway apartment. Alpert and his partner Jerry Moss own A&M Records, the largest independent record company on the planet. Their label was immensely successful, recording a dizzying range of taste, a stable of adult popsters like the Carpenters, Mega Rockers, the Police, and the dreamy Cat Stevens. A&M's magic could put jazz on the pop charts. They took Chuck Mangione, a hard bop trumpeter, and the rare white face on a Jazz Messenger's bandstand, and pulled the number 4 Billboard hit Feel So Good out of him. Alpert also put Gato Barriere, a once flame-throwing tenor saxophone, atop the Latin jazz pico with albums like Caliente. Getz had just signed with A&M after a decade of fine albums for small labels that sold modestly. He and Alpert had just finished recording Appassionato, a synth-laden return to the bossa nova tunes that made Getz a pop star in the pre-Beatles 60s. Getz really needed the money. He and his ex-wife had spent a decade battling in divorce courts. He also been given a terminal diagnosis of liver cancer. He told drummer Mel Lewis, "I'm too evil to die." And his powerful live performances led some to believe that he sold his soul to the same Gehenna-based agent that Robert Johnson used. Albert had his chauffeur drive him and Getz to the magnificent Wilshire Boulevard Temple built by the Hollywood moguls of the 20s and 30s. The interiors were crafted by movie set designers, so lavish that it could be used as a soundstage for a Technicolor epic. The pair arrived to shul a bit early, uncomfortable in the grown-up bar mitzvah suits they were wearing. Alfred was quickly swarmed by music industry types, a life hazard when one is worth $1 billion. A hipper segment of the congregation plots seeing Getz in the pews instead of his usual bandstand homeland. Few approached, given his history of volatility. As friend Zoot Sims remarked, Stan Getz, a nice bunch of guys. And no one wanted to ruin his kavana, his spirit, just before the gates of repentance were flung open. Now seated, fumbling with prayer books just before the big show got underway, Alfred adjusted his brocaded yarmulke and asked the anxious-looking Getz about his trip to Israel a few years back as a means of calming him down before the long service. A light came to Getz's heavy lids as he told his pal, "You know, Herb, when I'm playing, I think of myself in front of the Wailing Wall with a saxophone in my hands. And I'm davening, praying. I'm really telling it to the wall." And then as they rose together, along with the rest of the congregation, Getz whispered into his friend's right ear, "I never played a note I didn't mean." And I'll finish it off. Phil Woods, Drifting on a Reed. You may or may not know Phil Reeds. He was a disciple of Charlie Parker. If you don't know him, you've heard him because he's the saxophone you hear on Billy Joel's Just the Way You Are, and also Dr. Wu, if you're a Steely Dan fan. New York State of Mind, another Billy Joel song, because his Juilliard classmate, Phil Ramone, produced the albums. And I interviewed Phil Woods a few years before he died for some program notes. And I said, why didn't you ever sort of record an instrumental version of Just the Way You Are and piggyback on that success? And he said, yeah, Joel, the trouble is that if it really succeeded, I'd have to play that at every show I'd ever do the rest of my life. And I did not want to do that. And I like this. This is taken from Mark Myers' Jazz Wax blog. It's from an interview. And I sort of like it because it is about apprenticeship in any form of art. Phil Woods, Drifting on a Reed, which is name of a Charlie Parker tune. I just graduated from Juilliard in 1952 and found myself playing at the Nut Club on Sheridan Square. After that great education, here I was playing Harlem Nocturne 10 times a night. I wasn't happy with myself. I didn't like my mouthpiece. I didn't like my reed. I didn't like my horn. I didn't even like my strap. One night, somebody came into the club and said, "Charlie Parker's playing across the street at Arthur's Tavern. He's jamming." I was going on my break, so I rushed over. When I walked in, there was this 90-year-old guy playing a piano that was only 3 octaves long. And there was an even older geezer on drums playing a tiny snare using tin pie plates for cymbals. And there was the great Charlie Parker playing the baritone sax. It belonged to Larry Rivers, the painter. Parker knew me. He knew all the kids coming up. So I said, "Mr. Parker, perhaps you'd like to play my alto." He said, "Bill, that would be great. This baritone's kicking my butt." So I ran across the street to the Nut Club and grabbed the alto saxophone that I hated. I came back and got on the bandstand, which was as big as a coffee table. I handed my horn to Bird, and he played Long Ago and Far Away. As I'm listening to him playing my horn, I'm realizing there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing was wrong with the reed. Nothing was wrong with that mouthpiece. Even the straps sounded great. Then Parker says to me, "Now you play." I said to myself, my God. So I did. I played a chorus for him. When I was done, Bird leaned over and said, "Sounds real good, Phil." This time around, I levitated over 7th Avenue back to the Nut Club. And when I got back on the bandstand, I played the shit out of Harlem Nocturne. That's when I stopped complaining and started practicing. It was quite a lesson. Thank you.
Okay, can we reconvene? Burt Kimmelman is our next reader, and Burt has published 10 collections of poetry, as well as books of literary criticism, including The Winter Mind, William Bronk, and American Letters. I'm going to say more about Bronk and Burt in a few moments. And he's also written scores of essays on medieval, modern, and contemporary poetry. In the 1980s and 1990s, he was the senior editor of Poetry New York. He teaches now literary and cultural studies at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. As a veteran myself of teaching at engineering schools, I would add that this kind of commitment is not for the faint-hearted. It is as rewarding a kind of teaching as there is when one by one students are made to realize that yes, poetry is at least as important as algorithms. As Burt's university and mine were but a few miles apart, and my students were not much different from Burt's, our teaching experiences have been somewhat parallel, and that means exceedingly difficult, but simultaneously exceedingly rewarding. In an interview with Tom Fink, Kimmelman said, "I think we are led astray by the assumption that poetry is really comprised of or is about thought or thoughts. Philosophy is, but poetry is an artistic experience. That said, it should be emphasized that Kimmelman is also a most accomplished critic as well as a poet. He holds up a mirror to ordinary events in an effort to reveal their innate poetry, as if asked, does the world belong to us, or do we instead belong to it? Frequently, on the lookout for deepened connections, he realizes they may remain at bay, but encourages his poems to emit slight signals of hope to us through the interplay of words on the page. That is from another critic, but it's absolutely, I think, on target. And then from John Curley, a mutual friend of ours and a very fine poet. Burt Kimmelman's poems flourish as they pivot from a repertoire of reiterated subjects, works of art, natural landscapes, family, the animal world, to a transfiguring notion of their properties and possibilities. For over 25 years, this practice has produced dynamic patterns of insight, patterns comprised of recurring figures and forms, which nevertheless shift in their relations to his poetic witness. Now, Burt and I met as fellow aficionados of William Bronk, who taught us the necessity of choosing exact words and not to appeal merely to whatever might be the focus of the day. Bronk was the poet of honesty and precision. Burt learned the lesson well and therefore stands among our best poets.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you everyone for being here. It's a thrill and an honor. It's been a great weekend, and I'm just very happy to be here, to be able to read to you. One doesn't often get to read to a really sharp audience, and I know this is. All right, so based on what Ed said, I just can't resist. I just want to add one thing about what it's like to work at a place like NJIT. I'm always very nice to my students because I know that among them there are some who, if I piss them off, they could steal my identity. So that's what you learn working at a STEM school. So I'm going to read from my two most recent collections, starting with the most recent, most recent, Wings Apart, and then I'll read from the prior one. Caught Bird. One of our cats walks the backyard fence. In his mouth, a bird he sets beneath a bush. Our other cat joins him to watch, caught by branches, the bird thrashing, then scurrying free. As one, they leap to chase it, running it down. The spent bird killed, I watch the leaves flutter in sun. The death of Jim Tolan, who was a poet. This begins with an epigraph from William Carlos Williams from his poem, The Artist, with an entrechat perfectly achieved. The news arrived as expected after holding on for 3 years. The funeral was held in crowded Brooklyn, a rainy, cold Saturday. Over drinks, bites of food, we talked while photos of a life spooled through a TV screen. We sat down to watch. The closed coffin nearby. There had been massive organ failure. Friends and family were arranging themselves to begin the formal remembrance. The night before, I was sitting at a Manhattan bar, waiting for the jazz cabaret downstairs to open. The cavernous room was mobbed with people freed from work on a Friday, but I had my stool and my glass of beer was just right. 2 kids next to me tried out the barbecue, sipping fancy drinks. The bartender was keeping his pace, always moving. He knew about crowds. I saw it all work through him. He was an artist. I was lucky to be there. He was pouring some red liquid over ice, then something clear though syrupy. With one hand, he squeezed half an orange into a strainer, shook it, added in the juice. He twisted a slim peel of lime into a tight spiral he set floating on the surface. There were instruments, a long silver stirrer, a small grater he would use to scrape dust from a nutmeg held at the ends of his pursed fingers. He moved gracefully along the bar, a dancer looking young. He could shake a drink with his one hand while teasing the customers, pouring with his other. He filled beautifully stemmed glasses with brightness to the brim, not a drop left over. He set drinks at the end of the bar for the waiters, dispensing his largesse. Squaring his shoulders, he eased back up my way. He knew what he was doing. This was the night. Marriage. Making love, sorrows and joys are one. A Summer Rain at the Mount, Lenox, Massachusetts, 2018, for Ed Foster. The shadows in the pines are darkest in the rain, soft green limbs bowing down. No wonder what woods hold, all we want beneath the hidden sun, slate sky. A Round Robin. In July, the red-streaked sky lies over dark hills. December's sunset turns our bare maple tree gray. April's birds sing early, sun rising, fill the world. October's birds begin their silence, leaves falling. July's birds sing sunset to its soft conclusion. Let me just get that bottle of water, sorry.
Oh, there's one.
There you go. Film noir for Charles Borges. This is a poem inspired by his line, "Darkness is never dark enough." I love old movies. Their turmoil in black and white on a dark evening, a rainy street, a single car the size of a trolley parked out front of a townhouse. The only way to know someone is living somewhere. In that building, a guy has murdered a man who was choking him, who found he was having a drink with his girlfriend in her apartment, who, panicked, handed him the scissors she left lying beside her sewing box. She's beautiful, like in the portrait of her displayed in a gilt frame that sits in the window of a store just across the alley from a swank restaurant where the guy that night dined with some people he knew in town. Afterward, on the way to his hotel, he sees her there in the painting. But then he hears her ask him if he likes it. The her in the painting, now the woman waiting in the alley shadows for him to pass by. The dead man was never much of a lover, she says, standing over the corpse, stabbed in the back just because someone fell hard for a painting. And we know why he'd kept her all alone in her Art Deco apartment. The guy's a professor at a leafy college north of the city, a married man who lives with idols in quietude, who has suddenly realized he must fight for his life and get rid of a dead man's body. He wraps it in her blanket, carries it down her wet brownstone steps in the opaque rain, stuffs it in his car and drives off. But the cops pull him over, since the guy's forgotten in his haste to turn on the car's headlights. In the heavy rain, the one cop asks for his license, and there's a letter from the Board of Education in the guy's wallet, which the cop reads, water dripping from his cap, telling him, "Next time, Prof, turn on those lights." The guy's feeling pretty good, but he'll leave tire tracks and footprints near some woods where a Boy Scout trips over the body the next day, and it turns out the dead man was a town father, but the killers know his secret. Unplanned, even perfect, crimes always go wrong, because crimes always do. Because people just don't realize they're living in a wrong world. Because they kid themselves, but I know the facts, and I don't want to see the ending. Tired anyway, I turn off the movie. But let's face it, the world's not simply black and white. And I don't mean to say the world isn't gray, because I know it is, though it's also as red as blood, as green as her eyes. Why can't life be like Keats's Ode to Autumn? No doubt a poem the professor taught until his whole world no longer made sense. A poem about desire, really, what we're all born into, innocent at first. Homicide is simple, people simple. Poetry not so simple, as it bestows a story we need in which no one's in trouble, like in a movie when the world's good and it makes sense, but then it all goes wrong. Okay. So I'm going to switch to my prior book, Abandoned Angel. Just read a few from there. Snow squall. Swirl of birds swerves apart in white air. From shore, Miami Beach. Small green waves lapse on shore. Beyond them, heads, shoulders rise and fall. A gull glides above, just for now, some long white clouds. man and woman reclining after a pen and ink drawing in one of Faye Jones's notebooks. In our sleep, we fold ourselves over our dreams to hold them, protect them. At times, I see you in my dream. Do you see me too? They are there as we lie over them, and we are there dreaming the same dream. No one else dreams our dream. They are there, and we are there too. Our eyes are closed, and if we opened them, they would be gone. Would you be gone too? In the night, I watch myself sleep. Awake, I see me in my dream, and I think my dream is enough. At times, I yearn to live in dreams, to live in their mute enchantment. Although we cry out in our sleep, sometimes we feel we belong there. We live as one, sleepless, sleeping. I fold myself around you. I fold myself around you the way the nights fold themselves around the days. Just when we think we will not go on much longer, we do. The moment of life is long. People live on. We think of them. I think of you, and you are there. You live on. I, too, somehow do. This is about a painting that I saw in the New York Times by Leo Haas, painted between 1942 and 1944, and it's titled Arrival of a Transport to Theresienstadt Ghetto. Reading the New York Times during a blizzard, 2016. 1. Delicate lines tell us in black ink what there is to know. Barren trees, bared branches bending over a road winding through whitewash, far past fields of snow, the horizon vague, possibly where the journey into winter's darkness on foot in the cold has long been begun. 2. In the foreground, a single light before a house covered in snow. At the road's end, might make shadows through a tree just beyond at dusk. And up the road in the trees, bent people marching, led by soldiers, one with rifle, motorcycle ahead of him, but mostly trees. 3. A dark parade of inked captives behind the trees along a road, meandering through countryside until scant strokes of the pen cease, where the eye falls. Toward a dark sky, figures of some birds appear, take shape in distance in a somber light, ink and wash merged, nothingness. 4. I lie in bed as I read my newspaper, snow falling outside, past my window in silence, white for the moment, for the morning, casual lines, these playful lines, the intricate trees, what I see. I should not look more closely, but I do, knowing I am helpless. Taking off from Orly Airport with an epigraph from William Bronk, out and back the mind. The city below, the houses among the mists of morning, the stands of trees, and as we ascend, the wheat fields beyond them all, the eye seeing farther. We are just as much there as here, alien and true. two more. The World at Dawn, and this has a long epigraph from a poem by Robert Creeley called The World. I wanted to ably, I'm sorry, let me start that again. The epigraph reads, I wanted so ably to reassure you, and got up and went to the window, pushed back as you asked me to, the curtain, to see the outline of the trees in the night outside. And that's from a poem of his called The World. Lying still on my bed, I look through my window. Outside, trees stand into the sky, their branches and leaves above roofs, chimneys. The dawn is white. I am looking out on the world. There is its light. A car goes by not far away. I might say something like, if I were dying, I will leave this world. The word world is so important for poets. Some knew it was a word. Stevens, Bronk, and Oppen, Creeley are all gone. They thought about words. They knew how very desperate words are. Their words are mine. I lie still and I say that the world, its light is out there and I want it. Last poem. Sunday morning in Krakow. A train ride back from Auschwitz last evening where we stood within walls. We listened how the weakest slept on the bottom tier in the mud, yet the top tier was really no better in cold Polish winter under a roof that let in snow. Just then, heavy rain held us up, kept us to wait in the darkness. Of course, there were horrors I will not name. Too late. Morning's bells are full of grief I take with my tea. Thank
you. Quite an evening. Thank you. A good many years ago, a poet whom Murat Nemet-Nejat and I both know remarked to me that Murat was the best Turkish poet writing in English. What? I replied. Murat's an American poet, not a Turkish poet. Well, you know what I mean, our mutual poet friend said. No, I really don't, I said. I suppose that you mean his work has echoes of the Turkish Edda poets, but he's indebted to art and cinema and mythology and history and the very structure of the English language as he is to anything Turkish. No, Murat's an American poet. An American poet, yes, but not an apple pie American poet. In its depth and breadth, Murat's work is daring and challenging, complex and resonant. It is also intricate in the way he manages with such skill to interweave sound into substance, substance into sound. Words and even syllables are reference for metaphoric leaps that can encompass history, art, mythology, film, and poetry itself. Murat's poems exploit every dimension of language in that they are written for both the ear and the eye. His arrangement of words on the page is always intentional. He's a painter in language.
Murat is one of those individuals whom my old friend Bill Corbett used to call a triple threat, in that he is an accomplished poet, translator, and critic. His most recent book of poems, out maybe 2 months ago, Murat, from Chax Press, Io Song. He represents and reinvents the Io myth, then invents his reinvention of that myth. Other poetry collections include Spiritual Life of Replicants and Animals of Dawn, which Talisman both published. He's the editor and translator of Eda, an anthology of contemporary Turkish poetry, and which I think changed everybody's idea of what Turkish poetry was, as well as translations of Seyhan Erozcilik, Ece Ayan, and Burkan Keskin. And his criticism and essays are all over the place. Please welcome Murat Nemet-Nejat.
No, who was it? Later to me, whisper in my ear. Yeah. All sorts of anonymous comments about me I've heard through my life. Okay, and as Chris mentioned, thank you very much for inviting me to this. I'm very honored to be here, and it's a great pleasure for me. And one of the things people kind of associate me with the concept of Eda, which I apply to Turkish poetry, but also gradually it became a poetics that as an American poet I use in the American language. And people ask me, what is Eda? You know, could you give me a kind of thumbnail definition? I don't know what Eda is, you know, whatever, a sound, I suppose. But one of my explanations is a short essay that appears in the Spiritual Life of Replicants. So I'm going to read that poem and the page that follows it. Eda. If one wants to grasp the underlying principle of 20th century Turkish poetry in one stroke, it is that it brings animism into the middle of our global universe. Everything in that poetry becomes relatively clear from that perspective. Not only trees or animals, but in this poetry, colors, objects, things, natural processes are in dialogue with each other, weaving their endless patterns. Eda is the structure of that pattern, the mesh of linguistic and geographic coordinates which go to its creation. Not the individual, but the objects, colors, things are at the center of this endless transformation. The ego attached to it only tangentially, a detail, suffering and ecstatic. It is this peripheral relationship of consciousness to wider natural forces, subjective and objective, visceral and abstract, which gives Turkish poetry its stunning originality. Consciousness dies, the eye dissolves into motion, silhouetted by the dark matter of words. The next poem is a visual poem, basically. This is the next poem. And it says, E, then up, R, go, L, go, then after space, D. Okay, and I'm going to read then a poem that I wrote just recently, about 2-3 months ago, which will be in my next poem. It's called Camels and Weasels, which is a quotation from Hamlet, where Hamlet is teasing Polonius about what does this look like, about clouds and so on and so forth. Yeah. Camels and weasels. Yeah. Okay. Entropy. Wake joins the backflow of waves, distinguished from them by its color. Then it disappears. God, looking at the waves, boat disappearing in sunlight when the eye closes. Then only a sway of the waves. Wave becomes water, then wave, then water, sway. Its wings, osprey, approaching the waves, for bobbing jetsam, jettisoned somewhere in the mind. Wake as the mind forms the backflow of waves, distinguished from them by its color, then it disappears. So the rest of the reading I'm going to read for my last poem, Our Song. I will start from the very beginning, the first few pages, and I will kind of progress with gaps in between. And the first poem is really is around the word. There's one line by Shakespeare's first sonnet, the line being, "In your own bud buryest thy content." I was always puzzled by the pun that Shakespeare makes on the word content and content. You know, in your own bud buryest both your contentment, so you are masturbating kind of almost, and the other one, your content. You don't procreate. I was wondering why, is it an accident that these two words mean is the same thing? And I etymologically examined it, I kind of did research, I realized that the Indo-European root of the content is tenere, and tenere means extension. Extension, when it goes east to India, becomes tantra, waving, open-endedness, music. When it comes west, becomes content, control. In that way, Our Song is this constant struggle between chaos and this momentary control that once again it dissolves into chaos. The whole poem is made of 13 parts. Yes, 13, yeah. Just one short of a sonnet. The secrets of a language are hidden in another language. Oh, Tantra, Tantra, the secret of my heart. In your own bud buryest thy content, Sonnet 1. Fierce goddesses embodied in mystic syllables, visualization of power centered in the broken body, Christopher Wallace, of words, their erotic liquid, mother loads emitting radioactive gold mines. I can stop them. Motherfuckers, magma, ablution, my grandma entering the glory hole, and before taking a leak, 7 cups, after 5 cups, empties on it, as if the centerfold of an underground magazine. Ankara, my kind-hearted stepmother. That's a line from Turkish poet Cemal Süreya, and it's a takeoff on the famous saying in Turkish is that Ankara, the capital city of Turkey, is a wife, Istanbul is the mistress. So I took that word Ankara kind of around it. I wrote this poem that crosses kind of what these things mean in different kind of contexts. Ankara, my kind-hearted stepmother. Ankara, an, moment, second. Kara, black. Ankara, second black, not first. Ana, mother. Kar, doing it. Kar, snow. Kara, to the snow. Kara, land. Kara, black. Kir, prick. Kara, the snow. Kara, old crone. Kirhane, prick house. Next to our synagogue in Istanbul, there was a prick house on wooden tables at the end of Yom Kippur in the dark, in the intersection of our street and theirs. The ladies of the night and their pimps left glasses of water for us to drink for free. Sebil, mysterious Sibyl, so civilized, realized 30 years later, I went to the same spot, the synagogue in its porch garden, where I'd spend 2 evenings a year, the twinkling lights mixing with the stars through the sukkah, was all in ruins, the rusting gate ajar, and a red rooster was strolling at home among the lunar mounds and weeds. Red rooster, as in red light district, red, kızıl, kız, virgin. Kız, angry. %100 kız, 100% virgin. Use, 100. Use, face. Use, swim. Rooster, horoz. Whore and Oz, as in the Wizard of Oz. Part 2. Cyclops. Freedom from perspective falling through receding walls of flat plains. There's a footnote to this. Noises proceeding from the heart of volcanoes were attributed to Cyclopses also, due to his brain. This Isle song, I forgot to say. Isle song is about the myth, but also basically is an elegy to my poet friend Benjamin Hollander. Also, it's a kind of an essay on biography, and in the second part, an essay on autobiography. So, also, due to his brain tumor, Benjamin Hollander lost all sense of depth during the last weeks of his life. Prophecy and space. Face to face against a flat screen, eyes looking at each other through wires of amorous embrace, apricots hanging from branches. This is a reference to a Nazım Hikmet poem where two lovers are facing each other, looking at each other, and there are apricot trees in the background. Apricots hanging from branches, lines parading against a flat sky, strewn in the ever fluidity of montage, in the river of my eyes, broken time passing. Ah, weeping fragments of language, the flower follower of my soul, in the force fields of a wounded slashed eye, the heightened graphicness of a life is revealed. This is something I don't want to read the footnotes about. Benjamin talks about how this movement creates a certain kind of montage. Collage become a dynamic force in montage. It's a kind of transformation into a new form of poetry. The next poem, again, is a visual poem. This is the visual poem. The title is Sex Toy. And every line except a few is one single word, one single letter. A quarrel in the kitchen can be a screw into the universe. Theater. She's Sherlock Holmes. Dr. Watson pulls down his Calvin Klein's. Violence at bottom is a crack of yearning. She fell into the trapdoor of his love for her. Ardors, radar, odor, adore. Ariel, Ariel. She didn't fetch her hair along, kept it on the dresser, full of despair. But her hair fell through the unlit cracks. I undid her drawers. I drowned myself in her hair. The next one also kind of is a visual, this is a visual dimension. Dashes in the counter space, broken dishes, slash. This sadness above me, when will it stop brooding? Io's lament, calf sounds, half sounds, hoof signs, in the agon between the ear and the eye, sings, drifts to signs. Islands, islands spelled E-Y-E-L-A-N-D, islands, grazing of Io in the field, gazing, a letting go, letting be, a magnetic junk food binge consuming my interior space, signatures, the anorexic melancholy of loneliness, the gray dawn, the lapping gloves of my awkward caresses must be returned. The moon resurrects the minarets. Death flies with a somewhat beauty. Love of a not yet sensible Asia is the barely sensible skin of plants. In a democracy of the senses, water, water, narcissus on the shore, white-petaled, seeps in narcotics, looking absent-minded. Boiling water spoils. Then I go to part 5. I'm going to read almost, except for one last, relatively longer piece, I read the whole section. And the first poem is the first line that Hamlet utters, more than kin, less than kind, except that in this poem, more than and less than appear as mathematical signals, signs, rather than. So, more than kin, less than kind. Dick in, son in jail. Dying in a Turkish bath. Did you ever attend a public bath? I did. The candle near me blew out, and I became blind. The blue of the dome disappeared. They relit a candle on the navel stone. The marble was wiped clean. I saw some of my face in it. It was bad, something awful, and I became blind. I didn't expect quite this from my face. Did you ever sob while covered in soap? Pornography. Flowing peaceful along the sandy banks, whose water halted her flight, and she implored her sisters to change her form. And so, when Pan had caught her and thought he held a nymph, it was only reeds that yielded in her arms. And while he sighed, the soft air stirring in the reeds made also the echo of a sign. Rainbow. Rainbow is the first gauntlet of boast by God in the Bible. You know, when the flood occurs, he said, I will not do it anymore, you know. So a promise, he puts the rainbow in the sky. Yeah. So rainbow is the first gauntlet of boast by God in the Bible. Serial criminals hearing voices emblazon their messages in red on the mirror, rouge, blood, after having butchered their victim on the bed. The killer, drained in its murderous ecstasy, does it say, remorseful for that very moment, I'm sorry, pardon me, I'll never do it again. Then write the message in the surrounding space. Hermes in action as an agent of Zeus, rescuing Io, the play within the play. Hermes bored Argus with stories until all his eyes fell asleep. The story of Pan and Syrinx was not boring but opiate and hermaphrodite, warm and full of spume and dream, worm and scum and herpes. A. Syrinx was a woodland nymph with many suitors. B. Pan of the reed chased her. C. Syrinx pleaded with her sisters to change her into reeds. D. Soft air moving through reeds. E. Is bleating through hoofs. F. Sounding like a sigh. I. Sighing in the wind. E. Pan liked the sound and bound them together with wax and called them syrinx. F. Hermes cut off his head. G. Hera put Argus eyes on peacock feathers. Joy. For a period of 15 years, a recurring dream being inside a bath with a large pool, smooth green wall tiles, a replica of a place I had visited with my family as a kid in the ancient Ottoman city of Bursa, was the only dream of unadulterated joy I ever had. The color of the joy was green and its shape circular. I only remember entering that bath and waking up with that feeling of joy, nothing in between. A cross, an X, a no, a body, a while, a screen, a perpetual. Virginal, to bathe in your water between your face and your hair a hand must be. Waters were alive, madly to love, links and links. I couldn't tell what it was. It rose? Was it house? I couldn't make it heard. Your loving kisses were like a mask glued to my face, to pull them out in memories, hair of fortune. Then I'm going to read, this is kind of almost a spiritual exercise for me, this next poem, which is a completely long visual poem where I really don't know how to read this poem, but I always kind of, you have to enter it and kind of find your way through the poem. That's what I will try to do. And, Hermes bored Argus with the story, and Argus of the 100 eyes listened. Subversion of what is seen in the visible. Hairy like Spanish moths on Louisiana oak, against the sky, don't ever, like Askian, combing her hair, sideways spinning a thread of dove erotic words, burying into muriels, varnish, evanescing pink, full of sweat birds, damask, dumb, sweat beards, swan and swan birds, burying into muriels, burials, sin, lazy hours, hoarse and hazy, in cerulean blue tiles, oh, seductive hot bathhouse, solemn as cloud of mist in, but no solo, Jack. Succuba crossing incubus, cumulent mist, Cuba. Hairless in Cuba, hairless her layers, lace her layers in Cuba. Succulent, succumbing scissors, sea blinded lilac, passive seed or dew, seaman, Haiti, ebony, Occam's razor, shaving charm. Shearing the cloud now is clear. My blood spills on the ground. The cloud is modest, blushes and disappears. Your face shadows in my palm. I see it and squeeze it, drinking stars from the urinal. His face is almost gone. My desolation is pure. The water is flat. My pain is on. The bird crawling on your back and belly and finally becoming a squirrel. Toes, 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 toenails. Oh, my darling. The sea visible, moon us, a new kind of distance, water exhilaration, substantial as fields approaching me in the black wings of night, lay down, my pillow split, my guitar dew-dropped, my heart streaked with moonlight blood, indeed, oh, indeed, in dread, wings, let's. Yeah. Okay, I think I will read three more pieces. Okay. This is Seed. The title of it, Seed, is S-E-E, then separate a distance, D. Seen is an escape from seed. To be seen is to be a seed. I is a procreation. To be seed is to stir seed and to be fucked. To be the subject to the I is to be desired. I am seed by you. I is the tongue of knowledge. Knowledge is 2 lumps of sugar. Ha ha, in social intercourse, hearing, I'm glad to see you, can we say, thanks, I'm glad to be seed by you, too. Nice to seed you. Therefore, seed is veiled as seen. This is the Nile. It is based on a passage from Antony and Cleopatra. This is, as a matter of fact, amorous is a very, because one of the memorable courses in my alma mater, I spent 2 years at Amherst College, and one unforgettable teacher I had was Baird, and I took a Shakespeare course from him, and the strangest kind of classes you can imagine. You know, he never discussed the class. He would assign a play, and we come to the class, and the whole thing, he would talk all sorts of things, and finally, at the last moment, he makes a reference to the play. And Anthony Cleopatra, the reference was that finally, Antony loses the war, and they come there capturing Cleopatra, and they say, you know, we are going to take you to Rome, we are going to display you, and so on and so forth. And Antony, Cleopatra looked and said, oh. And Baird said, I'll never forget that O, he said, is the entirety of Antony and Cleopatra. And kind of the letter O constantly appears in my poetry. I think it was really at the moment. But this is a passage, the passage is, purple the sails, and so perfumed that the winds were lovesick with them. The oars were silver, which to the tune of flutes kept stroke, and made the water which they beat to follow faster, as amorous of their strokes. So basically it's a mesh around that. On the arms of the maternal smell, barbarians' scars, hermaphroditic pronouns, he made love biting her own lips. Her delight, dolphin-like, they showed her penis above the elements he lived in. Clitoris arose, Dahlia, ah, my Cleopatra, a rose bitten tenderly. The barge she sweated in, I sat on its sweet bud. Stood pretty dimpled boys like smiling cupids, with diverse colored fans whose wind did seem to glow the delicate cheeks which they did cool. What they undid, did. So from later poem, I will read one more short piece, and just this is the piece I will read. And every book that I write has there's an essay about the poetics of that essay, and this is the poetics of Isle Song. Cause and effect, a linguistic play, the metaphysics of a poem. We think words are for us, we are for them. While in our daily life, cause precedes effect, nothing comes of nothing, i.e., cause is the cause of effect, they are the same. In language, a new meaning is its own cause. Because of effect, effect imagines cause. It is the original cause of effect. In the mirror of language, one experiences the world upside down, time is reversed, or paralyzed, time frees itself and dissolves into air. We see the future as the past. Etymologically, each word has infinite openings lying before it. But once the direction is taken, just at that moment, language materializes a new meaning for that sound, and instantly another infinity opens around the word, as if expanding waves around a pebble, or Basho's frog casting itself into the water. Time in language is built by a series of instantaneous transformations that, while we imagine that the old meaning is the builder of this home, its original cause, a brick, whereas what we have is endless expansion, tracing the motions of endless soul, whereas the cause is just a whim, a stirring of the wind, occurring that instant, not necessary, absolutely necessary in the ocean of the imagination, of which words are just waves, meaning is just what we can see, looking into the darkness of ourselves, into its infinite dangers and riches in which we are a momentary dream, surrounded by dreams, what we call universe, what we call language, a selfie depicting oblivion surrounds the individual dream into which I wake. I dream, I am wading. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Murat. Give your ears a bit of a rest just for a moment here with some thanks. I wanted to thank Tomas Pinto Franco, who devotedly filmed these things for us. The care he puts into these, he will not let me do my own readings at home. He says, no, it won't be any good. and yes, you do. And he takes great care with it. It's really appreciated that you come over here, my friend, and do all this. The other thing I just wanted to point out while you're stretching is the two people I get to work with here. I'm the junior member, and I was added late into the dream of these things, is Mr. Sawyer-Lauçanno down here, who has a pedigree 40 miles long and is one of the most humble people that I've ever known. Godfather to my child, but a wonderful poet and a great spirit that is pushing this whole idea of doing this forward. And then there's our dear Mr. Foster sitting up in the back, who, I mean, as I have said many, many times, the lineage of Ed's work has affected so much of my life, has been a sounding board, an encouragement, a place to go. I mean, he published my book when and nobody else, everybody else was doing this with it. And Ed is a great treasure, and this is a dream that he had. And is continuing to pursue, along with a school for the summer, which is really a cool idea in the vein of Black Mountain, to somehow seed that up here and make off with a little bit of energy. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is behind all of this is our dear poet Patricia Pruitt, whose dream this is that we're all trying to enact. I think it was over dinner some night coming out here to see you two, where she said there should be something in the Pioneer Valley. This is ridiculous, and push these two men over many dinners that when they were socializing to pursue this. So she is the silent partner in all this, and it would not be possible without her. And we are deeply in her debt. If you don't know her book that Ed also put out, I highly recommend her collected poems. And that brings me to Mr. Keith Jones. I was telling Chris last night, I've been rummaging. How can I introduce Keith? How can I introduce him? It makes me crazy trying to address what I see and feel. But what I came up with was the first sense I had of you, Keith, was a particular searching reach, is what I made a note so I wouldn't forget. A particular searching reach that I heard. He was doing a written introduction to a poet at Harvard. And the ground that he covered and what he opened up for that man getting up to read was extraordinary. And I'd seen Keith around. He was starting to circulate around the Corbett pressed wafer circles. Bill put out one of his books and brought it to us. And he has been in to read for me. And that particularity is a wonder, and he is voracious in his searching reach that he practices. I was watching him this afternoon when we were going through the Emily Dickinson house, and he was looking at the piano. Tomas and I were talking about this, and the guy said, "Are you interested in the piano?" And he said, "I was trying to imagine Miss Dickinson's hands on those keys." And that's the way he approaches his poetry. And I welcome Mr. Keith Jones.
How we doing? I didn't entirely anticipate being the culminating speaker. Is that right?
You are.
Is that right? Yeah?
You're it.
All right.
The closer.
Yeah. All right.
No pressure.
August. I at once have so much that I want to say about this event, other than just, merely, or maybe not merely, but out of a deep sense of gratitude, sharing how privileged I feel to be here and to be in the company of you all, and to lift my voice and raise my voice and add my voice to all of yours. So it's really a deep, deep honor. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? I could probably speak without this, actually. And I both simultaneously want to inhabit something like pure speech and also pure silence. And I think that's something of what Stephanie last night was referring to as a kind of potency of this thing that we do. So this is a new manuscript. It's titled "And Limbs of Earth Animal the Light." And I am really, really eager and grateful to have this occasion to read from it. And limbs of earth animal the light. Where shallows of earth hurt my eye, depths evade description. Venice, Dakar, moist birds caught in sad dominion, so few who now fly. Caught in what is. I've come to everything late, she said. Glaciers, our sordid prose. I knew you as you, who were once estranged, running blade, island's edge, war's loose tooth, jawbone we were attached to. Had he not been there, had he not seen, I dashed your lyric upon a rock. Wordless parabola, you who weren't ready for this route. Fire doer and door, obscure and optical, I'm here for your synthesis. Huey's blues and Malcolm's flower. It's not suddenness, less recent. Tree limbs alive like grass. You, too, not singular. Ebony, the color of your French. I'm on an island, and this is your dream. A forum paint brushes, sovereigns gathering gold. Remember the land you pointed to? Sepulveda, the streets of Rodney King? We don't say Stokely. We don't say Huey. Malcolm's flower was the world you gave it. Desks and chairs, insensate grammar. On the chalkboard, ovals you made blue, embryos so tiny, flicker in their firmament, explode, overgrow their own parentheses, silence, startling, deep green grass. Premonitions of childlight. You can't tell me what my beauty is, home of, thought of, not my own. Whom is a home without enclosure, a territory of truth. Dashed bonds extend the logic of, I embodied your wish, crisp clip out of air, air of signs, confirmed phenomena, disperse, black box annulled, secret tellings of. Whose blessings, anyway? Way down in debris where sky fell and forest burned. I stitch my hyphens to witnesses and witnessing. No circuit here, not routed through confusion or money. Whose room is the room I'm in? Adjacency, flow and care, rift along a watery portal. Belief, brief photon, my gift to you. Arc of butterflies. Its flashlight had broken you, looking out, broken in. You is my witness. Henry Dumas. Seer of quantum things, edges of mangroves, fully adrift, raft of wondrous floodings. Today's my vehicle, right now. My home, alive to, tarrying in would-be folds. I see trees in you vanish, sprig of barbed wire, concepts you'll get around or under. I know you will. Sprig of barbed wire, and there the care of rain. Free is a startled verb. Fact of, taunt lay tied, broken fence post. Free is, and so surrounds a gash of needs. Sprig of barbed wire, my chalk line is full of fragrance. Blood-streaked and no different, it flies with eyes watching on callous hands. What you map, I move. Gown of young flower. Blue surface, wind's blade. Liquid light in paraphrase, I worry, wave the quotidian, concerning cesserned blue surface, spangled mist, desert scroll. I turn to you, plover, lives at the end of what, and skew potsherds of, blasted pin, hammered hole, projectiles blur, blue banner us, gunshot us, like this, fill the clotted bowls, bloom, unsundered, eye of lessened blade, of cone, bore the tip of your lisps, your hands. Where my mind is, touch, eye, particle, can only watch this place. Lands held shore, topos, peaked by bay, darned, fern broke, forested wall you curbed, pasture gown where the temple was. You lost me, lost to me, burnt outline of grass, fire I still secrete, prayer cup of leaves. It is I of blue banner, crouched in ancient days, dark bluff, shelf at dusk's fine twilight lit, which lingers, which limns earth's circumference, held by various spheres, blinking, judded, jeweled, edged interference, liquid light in paraphrase, that is by you, night, that is by you, you. Folklore of winter. I'm not helpful in announcing myself. I can collect rain in ink spots, clear as snowmelt water, prism your fabula into birds. I thought of the quorum you gave, your few landscaped remarks, bred into sequences, orioles, plethora of jays, cormorants and finches, hymn in the palm of your hand. Nomenclature the painter knew, as in fern, as in wallpaper. I say the extra temporal cut, so deep you say bleeding, Orion meteoric above you, myopic shards of stone, who will dislodge you from ancient antecedents or speech in our time of escape? Macedonia. I've seen her many silences burst, not unlike petals of Beatrice, where Egypt was once concerned, Italy unlimited. I suppose you can command such antlers, strong branches in your archive, horsehair's missives to a violin. Sheen where they cut you, archipelago of grief. Far off and where you stand, a crown crowds the crossroads. No matter, sky will pace you. Massive variant, ancient tangle, little white ladies go berserk. Order the Americas unspeakable. Fire hoses and dogs, knife-flexed rays, diaristic, maritime, threaded by dreams, drums, burning vessels, time, a Parthenon to time. Inscrutable abode, air of social life, for Fred Hampton. How many of us here now awaiting gloom supreme? You'd think the thinking anagrammatic, alone in your car, wave coming, or your crib, which crib, what being born, wave of sound, noise of, recital of, apparatchik, wound in your ear. The tetherings tug you along. Sycamore unmottled in shadow, blank brick. Altars transfixed, lucid scrawl. I think of sky, glint of fragment, crystal there, a cry being crime, laden in stone, arc tangent to earth, rim of, sketches of, an appeal, or edges atlas. All dread, mute, nightlife's fury, dark air, its traffic, a temporal nest. I'd have gone out, but the sky was too big. Reminiscences dire, flatten your heart leap as you leap. Threads that weave, lost chronicles unspool. How you survive, white clouds where the pines are nothing. I'd say space between space, oracular truth, braids one finite phrase where lift crests and you await. No final form. The fall, slow-mo, in plural key, like liquid glass. How and in what number can you absorb the crack? Inmates go mad without the whole of your imagining. I ride with you. I can't corral, plateau the continent of. I was speaking to the rain, deciduousness of my cathedrals, forests sent out to sea, mirrors around the totality of. I found your book in a wave's hollow, hills pressed inside, round part where light came in, sodden part, brutality of eaves. Grain of world, grain of weather, we plateau, calf the stories of. Bridge where there was none. Theft of native is the given theft. Drums like paralinguists, look at the limbs bent and woven and the carvers who come for the clouds. Solo here, swift gulls beneath. Riot we are, mountain of morning light. glide of symbols in the early sheen, mango, avocado, cane, cacao, seismic flecks in the cove's weird necklace of stone, piano clarity, rubber veins in rubber trees. The port water is the crimson mask of trade. Where sky fell and forest burned, ribbons of broken idioms above iambic air, moon's naked studio of ash, which brings charcoal glyph and lantern of earth. Please, Toussaint, our hour is unkind. Let us treason together. Lay morning to night in prophetic light. The coast legislates nomads, flow of various guests unintended. I invite aspects and latitudes of opaque star, quieted aurora. I cannot measure your first cutting of wood. I will not stay in the hold of your silt, caught circuitry of worlds. I hardly knew what had happened, and there you were, new tenants, cracked citadel of orphans. We knew again, lifted heresies of various possibilities, flew outside, swam, slid along railway lines, unheard, stowaway of waves, colliding, tides, Lumumba knew, and Cabral. This poem takes a epigraph from Ed Roberson. The title of the poem is "The Dance Grew from Its Absence," and the epigraph is "Idiom is language outside itself." 1. Lips you drew, she held a cinema inside. Crumpled water she got free of, our garments, swift tonight, mirroring an avenue of waves. 2. Carapace in the sheen of you and hint of ampersand, luminous wing, parabola, blue char, Voyager lead, which is why we live there, loving the current. 3. Sky's origami builds, you on the end of that tether. We eat earthlight, she said. Bird lure and notebooks, apostrophe. Place of percussion where some wept unheard verbs and the gods they sent to teach us. 4. Cloud break, echo the wind is, bespeaks ruse and rhyme. Sun overhead made this cloth. War lifts, drift, and canticles of knowing. 5. Light she lit, gaze she gave, mi madre gave me her knee, her lap of hidden histories, immigrant sky, my eye was the vantage of. 6. Idols of ink, outskirts and others, discreet, by way of the porous. You feel how time turns and shatters, unstenciled crimes, unsure grip or gesture, optics of an ethic. 7. And a gleaming shrine, the hardware of the world's changed. I cut the glass of your apron, bloodstring, broken comma, anvil of your son. Sorrow's kingdom, next of kin. I idolized you, left theft ungoverned, hung a broken comma in the anvil of your son, smashed what separated us, conscript of salt water, brutal arc, the world some other fenced-in coronation of, mass incarceration. White cube and bristling grid, swing low, shot in the back where birds went blank tonight, precinct of glass, canticles and clouds, you're more than street's incident, fields whereby of cage, iambic sky, phrases of light, noonday's thorn or loop. occupation of Palestine. City of prose, burnt at the Pettus Bridge. Nighttime in the mirror of sound, we riot together, the shape of love to come, lip of lattice work or lace. Teleology of wound. And wings, always wings, arrive imprinted on sand. Voices of bones and stones brought in, I who held, who cupped the hollow where we lay, silhouette of broken crown. Gift of inwardness, we gown our eye in archetypes, bright walk, choral tone, each cantos, pretty as hell. Imprint of moon, she poured her beauty around. She found her monster, lilt gaze, ovals language, insides, quiet maze. I made of air. Hunger's last word, a bird and horse unsung by syllable, wondering where her insurgency went, she said, late in truth. Cried your ensemble, bracketed earth, planet and air, neurotic tinder, river of my thinking, appears narrowest Ruth. Cup of magnolia light, your nakedness, I, stolen form, life within, could it not have been in agreement with? Forest you cut, a portal to, weeping alone beneath the pavement. Animal is there, house is burning. Couldn't, and the dye of astral light? We sit in dilated passion, citadel, the coming rain, pollen laden, alphabetic bloom, in stone, in language, where I live and blaze. I cloak the air with painter's breech. This is for the painter Bob Thompson, or after the painter Bob Thompson. I held over the cusp of my holding metamimic, tiny rays, champagne ink soars into syllabus, ornets, ornate horn. Undergirded by light, birds born exculpatory, wounded by breeds. It flees, the sound of it, miasmic, garden of, sky and number bereft. Drapes he hung a nativity to. Wind-bent, staunch riverway, shallows his colors couldn't repeat. Gather, sail, the blue, royal abyss, firebirds, song, concerto or rag. The studio, the loft, will you feed me where all origination is? What do you think? Two more?
Yeah.
We good? How- yeah. You know, can I read a longer one that I really want to read? And then I'll end with a short one? Yeah? How's that? So it's called Temple Made of Bark. 1. Green gave way, rose of morning. Dear Amerigo, I approximate tiny glyphs, alive to all distances in August, skywork of day. 2. June's whetstone, uncoercively, clouds come. You break their entablature into syntax. Travel east, rare fundament. I, my onus, beginning. 3. Forgive the shore, the tomb, the man supine to passing benediction. He cannot go but half, and half is more than pity. 4. The whole world there in shrapnel. Shard lit, don't exquisite me. Parchment pours through each white sepultured face. 5. Sweet toppled trees, bands of white light where Page once was. In of love, if in of love is. 6. She aglow in the background, you can see how her office yields its tired light. The carved quotation ladders us, frame to frame. 7. Gerund, faint petals. I adrift your years beyond punctuation. I passed various limbs, lit by the palace gate, unsewn cloth. 8. I'm trying to tell you of brightest feud, sacred space we skirt, to give you earth where we didn't travel, just now, among the thorns. 9. You who press down harder on your syntax, countenance, or God sends breeze, threaded, echoing, sun-shot sail, I was of that world, Borealis. 10. Fly radio to me, I who not yet admitted to whom goes the sheet of weather and grates the loss. Precision struck through, white pine, the barren place. 11. Miniature hour, April's archive, once in a paper's thousand folds, sheer godlight in the water it holds, cup an emblem of earth, and womb the wound of a people. 12. Inside the old place of worship, clouds lace the sun overhead, blend the blue canopy, A plus ampersand. Dried hydrangea and madrigal, I was solitary then and unbelated, singing of the poor. 13. The flashing past of the aggregate to be lit with conscience. I can feel the way the lonely eye falls, clay pot, moon, and mountain inside. 14. Within the house, another house, and a ladder to reach the skyburn sign of the new year. 2 strokes that cross high above like cupping hands. I see you, anvil and anchor. 15. A question of number, thought so subtle, which reflects the mind of womb. Blessed, carapace, gorgeous, flesh, no shadow, but brittle flight. The room you're in, sorrow's limbs gathering. 16. Gold and blue in her eye, voice along the rim, which some say is cinema, alone in light where God is, beyond shadow. 17. I limbed my feeling, my every road. The document we lost renounces the machine, poured out old cloth, sky at night, fingers the weavers poke through, the allegory therein. My love for you, where I belong, swallowing whole bodies of verbs where beauty might be. Whose child are you? I wanted to know what you dreamt, patient rebus, rebirth before the blue. And the last one, echoes of our time of escape. And in this place of sad republic stare, I can't look back. And in the coveting, a wish for what's not there that I cannot see. And lost in heresy, loss of who we were before our injury of we. And I, in absent flight, pilot along little symbols of summer. And I, on ribbon feet, I'm not you, it says, shrouds the clouds that move above you. And I, flung stave beyond the nominative, scissor an island in your ear. And I, a voyage incumbent, dark hide where lucidity accretes. And I a fluid plain where water is, frozen man, sky, fire, child of stolen sun. And she as peonies, milk jar of deepest woad, bone clock of November. And I in shadow turned dusk, slight adjacent jade, petaled somehow in shards. And you of crisp linen gown, streams of manumission. And I of thinnest apogee, drink from wasteland waters, your winters unsung. And you, paper axiom, womb, baroque home, and oak of consequence. And she who wouldn't have been that woman, nor he that man. And they a sigh, and she a context, waved free of grammar. Bright, raveled roof. And they who would have been your clavicle, your lattice work, your mother before your birth. And I who sing earth's canticle of fury, being lyre and Babylon. And I at numinous edge enter as seraph enters and say,